Hi, my name is Nick Cosentino, and I'm a Principal Software Engineering Manager at Microsoft. In this video interview, I was joined by Erik Andersen, who is a Senior Software Engineer and Tech Lead. Erik has spent a lot of time and a lot of effort helping others navigate how they can land jobs as software engineers. And in this conversation, we covered tons of ground with respect to that. Erik and I are both of the mindset that it's not going to matter if you're going for a boot camp, if you're self-taught, if you're going to post-secondary education. There are many different paths that you can take to become a software engineer. However, we will go over some of the things that we think stand out to make a big difference when you're trying to apply for jobs and other things that are over-indexed on. A big thanks to Erik for making the time to talk with me, and I think that you're really going to enjoy this conversation. So sit back, enjoy, and I'll see you next time. Erik, thanks for joining me. If you're able to, do you want to give us a little bit of background for kind of, and you can start as early as you'd like for how you got to where you are and when you knew, like, I'm going to be into software engineering.
Sure, absolutely. So I've been professionally coding for the last 12 years, and I got a boring, 4-year degree in a technical field, not computer science, but information systems,
Okay.
tangential to that. My journey, long story short, started when I was in middle school when my dad, who, as a software engineer, told me to not become a software engineer. So, as any kind of semi rebellious young child would be, immediately that piqued my interest in a specific field. So, we went through the process, built a computer together, built little macros for the video games I was working on at the time. And then that turned into, a professional passion at some point. Most recently, though, for me, the biggest change has been in the last 4 years, where outside of my kind of day to day software engineering job, I've tried to give back to the community and
Mhm.
by doing more events like this. So I host my own podcast. I co-organize a meetup in the Dallas area, and I try to be active and vocal online as an advocate for those who are also trying to break into tech.
Awesome. Yeah. And I went to that Dallas event, which is cool. We
Yeah, I'm
didn't.
sorry I missed you. Yes.
Yeah, no, but it was a very cool, even for myself, like to be able to create content online and then have this opportunity where, we're having this conversation now. We've exchanged online and stuff before, and having that opportunity to have met in person would have been really cool. So
Yeah,
it
yeah.
kind of doesn't happen without doing this kind of stuff. But yeah, I thought it's interesting. I've talked to a few people and like sort of games and stuff coming up early in terms of people discovering that they're into software is kind of cool. It's kind of similar for myself with like playing video games and being like macros into botting into whatever. It's just like ways to automate stuff that we're doing, right? So that's
It's
pretty
it's a
cool.
superpower that you develop, and then all these opportunities kind of open themselves up for you that you didn't realize were available beforehand. And especially as a young kid, like my first website was a Dragon Ball Z fan site, and I
Oh,
just felt like so cool
yeah.
for having that.
Yeah, I can remember when I like before I like I always knew I was into computers, I guess, but didn't really know software. Like programming was going to be my thing, and I can remember I have a sister that's a year older than me, and I remember being kids and we were playing like Neopets and stuff online, and you can like I don't know how that all works today, but you could have like a little storefront, and I remember she was like getting like HTML like sites and stuff for her Neopet storefront, and I was like, what is this? Like,
Yeah,
she
yeah.
did not pursue anything related to software, but I thought that was super cool that early on she was just like, got to make my Neopet store and customize it and stuff. So
Yeah, the interesting thing about it is that so many people start with video games, stuff like you mentioned, but I've actually never made a
yeah.
real video game myself. Like, uh, money or career opportunities, like the job market, kind of just drove me into a different niche, and I just kind of just take advantage of the opportunities that are handed to you. Still, though, on my back burner, someday maybe actually making my own game.
Yeah, that's awesome. Like one of my for side projects and stuff, I love recommending to people to build side projects, and I guess not even from a portfolio perspective, but just from practicing. And I have a role playing game that's like never been finished. It's like 20 years old, and like every couple of years when I'm like, you know what, like I got time, I should dive back into this. It'll never be finished, but it's been a really good playground for just like experimenting, building, and kind of just
Hmm.
I equate it to taking a big bin of Lego that you're digging out of the closet or something and dumping it on the ground and saying like, what am I going to build with Lego today? So
That's essentially what programming is in general, just adult Legos.
yeah, exactly. So when you were going, and this might be an interesting segue, but so you gone through school. For you at the time, like what did getting your first job look like? Because I want to kind of shift gears, and we'll be talking about the job market today and how people can navigate that. But I'm assuming, did it look different for you? Would you say at the time when you were looking?
Yeah, it looked different. It was easier.
Okay,
I would say I can talk some specific stories there to maybe make people today feel jealous, but there are some principles that overlap.
okay,
So, for example, even getting a 4-year degree, there's still competition for a limited number of internships that are
right,
available to you. And when you have no work experience and you're even competing with the people in your class for an internship position, I still was not getting a lot of interviews. Things weren't moving as fast as I wanted. So that being said, I uh, started my own company, had a little LLC that I
cool,
built apps underneath so I can get work experience on my resume. I think that's still applicable today. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about that
sure,
approach. Um, I partnered with my professor so I can build. He wanted an app built for him at the time. I was really into mobile development, so I was able to get him to hire me as a research assistant that
awesome,
I was able to put on my work resume as work experience that helped me get like a real internship later. So that's we can partner with nonprofits, community organizations in your local area. That's a strategy you can still leverage today. So I still had to do those back in the day, but
Mhm.
ultimately, my first real job, I had just a few months of experience with mobile development. I turned in my resume. I had those kind of line items that were just a few months old,
Sure,
and then I got hired. And then kind of the rest is history. That might not fly today,
sure.
but it definitely was easier 12 years ago.
And did you have you mentioned internships, but during school, did you have internships that you were participating in?
Yep. Yeah, and I thought it was a valuable part of my experience. I was a business analyst
Okay.
intern. That was my first kind of technical role. I thought I wanted to go into the business side of technology. Quickly realized how boring that is. And then my next internship was a software engineering internship.
Awesome. And did you have multiple internships during school, like that were software related, or
It was so I got into that one company, and after the summer was over, they let me stay on part time,
awesome?
and I just stayed and did that for the remainder of my time. So
Cool.
by the time I graduated, I actually had 2 years of software engineering experience,
Perfect. Yeah.
which that job search went a lot easier coming out of school with, even though my GPA wasn't the highest, I still had a lot more job interviews and opportunities than the 4.0 students that I was graduating with, just because I had some relevant experience that was evidence that I actually knew what I was doing.
Yeah, like you had started applying the things that you were learning and truly building things, but that's cool. I feel like I've been trying to see a little bit more recently if people have internship experience because I realized that's not an opportunity that everyone has, and not and I think that there's a sort of a million ways, especially today, that you can break into software engineering, whether that's going to university, college, boot camp, self-taught. Like there's many different ways, but uh, I know that there's a bit more of a paradigm shift, and this will depend where you're living, of course. Like obviously in the U.S., like a post-secondary school is very expensive, but this idea that like you can be getting internships depending on your program in college or university, and for me it was very similar. Like I had 2 years of work experience by the time I graduated, but I was in a co-op program, so we had to go school for 4 months, and like you were interviewing a couple of weeks into your first 4 months of university to have a job
Wow.
for the
Yeah.
next 4 months, and we flip-flopped back and forth for 5 years. So it was that experience, the internship experience. I don't think I would have even stayed in school if it wasn't for that. Like I didn't like school, but I
Yeah.
liked the internship.
I wish, if I can, I won't stomp on this podcast here because I could rail against the modern education system, and I have a whole soapbox I
Yeah,
kind of prepared for that. But in general, yes, I agree. I wish there was more apprenticeships,
yeah,
practical exposure to the principles you're being taught, because even now being a working professional, I'm not a recruiter, but I help with the recruiting process for several companies that I've worked with, and still surprised at the number of computer science graduates who still can't code.
Yeah.
Like they know how to write a function, but they, not necessarily like a whole full on project. And the amount of handholding they still need with 4 years of education, it's always surprising to me how little applicable experience some of these programs give their students.
Right. And obviously, like, it's a generalization, but that is my experience
Yeah,
as
yeah,
well, is that the focus ends up being like, it to me it seems the focus ends up being so much theoretical, like truly the science around these things, like taking you know, uh programming concepts. It's like, I mean, it's called computer science, but taking
sure,
programming
yeah, yeah. I
concepts
mean,
and is
exactly.
like mapping it to mathematics and stuff. And I feel like, I'm not saying that there's zero application of that in the real world, but I feel like that there's so many abstractions, there's so many frameworks, and like you end up not being sort of exposed to a lot of the business needs of like, we gotta build things, put them together, and like it doesn't matter if you like, if you happen to pick the wrong data structure for this, that's not the most optimal, like it's still gonna work. Like we can come back to that and, you know,
Yeah,
refine it, but
yeah. I think there's a role for the computer science. If you were inventing a new operating system, maybe you're putting rockets in space, you're creating a new medical device. There's probably that theory is valuable when you're doing that kind of low level or net
sure.
new development. But when probably 80% of the folks graduating with a programming degree, when they're just making websites,
Yeah,
mobile apps, like there's that level of theory is not as valuable as a practical application
sure.
of
Yeah,
your
even
education. Yeah,
I'm trying to think, like, the recently at Microsoft. So I've been at Microsoft 4 years, and recently, like I'm talking the last half of a year, have I started being exposed to some projects that we're working on where we're not just taking some, I don't want to say things off the shelf, but like we're taking concepts where we're like, hey, even this stuff exists in C sharp and .NET that we could use, but like we actually need to go like steer in like a deeper direction here. And like we are going back to data structures and algorithms and really being like, we have to go refine these things. But the system we're talking about is like, it's routing, and we're dealing with trillions of requests per day in a distributed system. So there are going to be these niche things where we're like, this is a little bit different than the typical mobile app or something that has to get built. So
yeah. I think there's a pattern though, like in the business world, and I'm not a business person, so stop me
sure.
if I'm wrong here, right? But you get some generic undergrad
Yep.
degree, and then you circle back a few years later and get your MBA. And I think the idea is after you have a few years of practical experience, that the next step in education that you receive, that master's degree, is a little bit more relevant
Mm,
to you. When I feel like for computer science, yes, there's master's degrees, but so much of the theory that you get early on is going to be completely forgotten after you finish that test, that segment, that course, that class. Uh, it would be better in my mind if there was more of a practical application up front.
yeah.
Maybe after a few years of software development, then you're kind of expected to come back and get that broader level of understanding because you'll kind of understand the reasoning and the why behind it.
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting point, right? It's like if you jam, and again, I'm speculating about this. I'm not an expert on the
Yeah,
education part.
armchair experts
Yeah,
on the education industry that neither of us have worked in. So,
right. But
yeah,
it's almost like a reflection of seeing this stuff in practice in sort of in the real world. But I agree with that because I have seen, and again, generalizations, right? I've seen individuals go through their degree program and then go in to get their masters, and then they start working. And what I've observed with that a lot is that there's so much thought around the theory. So when you're trying to go deliver work, it's like it's not yet perfect. I need to like there's just so much I don't know, like separation from like business needs versus like doing a homework assignment and being like, I need to make sure the professor's going to grade this perfectly. And it's like that's not, it's not going to be
yeah,
perfect.
yeah. At work, it's less about, and people joke about this all the time. Well, they'll say like, well, if you don't have enough time to do it right the first time, then how come you have time to do it the second time?
Right.
The
Yeah.
idea being that you're coming back around to fix it later. But I think that's actually the right way to do things. Like there is an immediate business need. They need value today.
Mhm.
So you don't do the comprehensive solution, but you do something that enables the business to stay in business so you can keep a job. You do that kind of short term. You meet them where they are. And then you just make sure you address any tech debt, periodically through your sprints, and you circle back on it later. And that's a totally appropriate way of approaching software development.
Yeah. It's not going to be perfect, but I think, yeah. So I see that kind of stuff that's posted all the time, like people's, and I wonder if the meta point is like, don't write garbage code, but I don't think anyone's saying going faster or
Yeah, yeah,
not delivering the most comprehensive solution. That doesn't necessarily mean the code is bad, right? It just means
yeah,
that you didn't get unit test coverage 100% plus functional test coverage 100% plus every possible edge case, with mitigation strategies. It's just like, this is going to work. It's going to solve the customer need. We're going to get proof of it. But I love that you said, like, I think something that is missing for a lot of this perspective that gets shared is like, if you don't get it solved for the business, you might not have a business.
yeah, exactly.
So
It's because to do it right, oftentimes it's like, well, okay, well now my estimate is 3 months, 4 months, 6 months long, and it's like, well, I can't. The business can't wait that long.
yeah,
Uh, so
it might be
move
different if you're
fast, break
putting a
things,
rocket into
circle back, and
space.
fix it. Yeah,
Yeah.
it would be different. Exactly. I guess I'm speaking for the generalized case of
Yeah.
you know web development, mobile app development. If you're writing airplane software that if something is wrong, like the plane crashes and people die, okay, sure, we probably need to get that right the first time.
Yeah,
Uh,
you don't necessarily want the users to be testing that to say, okay, we have the alpha version of the how the doors lock software, and like, let's go try that out, folks. It's or like
yeah,
how the wheels are going to retract, like that. That software is in beta. Let's go. It's no, probably not.
yeah, it depends on your industry. Yeah, so definitely whatever we're saying, take it with a grain of salt for sure.
Yeah. And I think that sometimes is missing when people share this kind of information. So they'll say, like, here's my stance on this stuff, like, and then you have like a general audience that's trying to interpret it, and you might be missing these nuances of like, in this industry it might look different, and there's so much context that is impossible to jam into like a post or a short form video or whatever it happens to be. So
Yeah, the general rule is that any anything you read online is just it's a magnified view, a focused perspective on one specific issue, and it's you can nitpick it all day. Having been a content creator for 4 years, it has been surprising to me how I'll put out sometimes the most innocuous of posts, the most just generally safe, gentle type of wording, and people will still, well, what about this? What about
yeah,
that? What about this?
you
Like, well, I'm
you
not
should
writing a book here, guys. I have 140 characters here. I'm trying to fit a thought into. Yes, you're true. Absolutely. No, I'm not going to write a thesis here on LinkedIn or Twitter.
yeah, it's like, testing is generally a good thing to do in software development. Then someone will be like, yeah, but did you think
Yeah.
about this? And
Oh,
it's like,
okay. Yes, sure. Exceptions exist. Very rarely anything you see online is going to be dogmatic and 100% true in all use cases.
yeah, which, yeah, it's kind of funny as a content creator to go through that. But
Yeah,
um
yeah, yeah.
so that, no, that's, it's interesting, right? Because I think when we're trying to help folks think about going for their first jobs and stuff like that, there's, I mean, people watching this, listening to this, odds are they saw it posted online. They're like, hey, like, I'm trying to get information about this stuff. But it's important to understand that when you're trying to gather this information, like, there's going to be bias, there's going to be context. And I love what you said about like having anything that you're seeing, right, or trying to take in is going to be a focused view on a particular subject. So there is like this responsibility of people that are gathering information to say, okay, this is someone's perspective. That in this conversation, it's two people's perspective. That doesn't mean It's fact 100% of the time in all cases, and like tattoo it on your body. It's like, no, this is
Yeah.
information and some perspective. Go
Yeah.
collect more.
Yeah. I think of it as I'm just giving tools to you that you can put in your toolbox, and the appropriate time to use that tool is going to be up to you. Like, to
Right.
give a kind of specific example, sometimes we'll talk about networking,
Sure.
and people will say things like, well, I have some social anxiety disorder, or that's incredibly difficult for me. There's nobody in my local market. Okay, well, maybe networking looks a little bit different to you.
Right.
Like, I'm not saying you have to go to a meetup every night and like talk to people. I think it's generally a good idea, but think about your local market, think about your personality, think about what your strengths are, and if that specific advice isn't applicable to you, then don't worry about it. Like, calm down. We don't need to be arguing
Yeah.
about the value of networking here.
Right. Yeah. And it may, like you said, it may just look different for some individuals, and there's other tools and things that they can lean into to compensate for that, which is great.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, okay, no, so this is, we started talking about the internship side of things, and I guess from your perspective, for folks that are going through college, university, if they have that opportunity, would you basically say like 100% try to go for that, or are there situations where you would say like internships maybe aren't a good thing as a kickoff point?
Yeah, so speaking generally, right, we just
Yeah.
talked about this whole, there are exceptions exist and blah, blah, blah. Generally speaking, yes, absolutely. Generally speaking, your internship experience or any part time work experience you can get while you're in school is going to be way more valuable than your GPA, which is what I feel like a lot of students, at least when I was going through school, tend to focus so much on.
Mhm.
GPA is optimizing for a completely different skill set than software engineering. 4.0 GPA means you can memorize things really well, you can regurgitate really well, you have that really good kind of mental muscle memory. It means you're really good at studying.
Mhm.
Uh, it You're really good at multiple choice tests. Like, it doesn't mean anything about can you solve a business problem on the fly with limited information and just your own wits. So at a certain point, and this is probably changes employer to employer, but 3.0, 3.5, as long as you meet that threshold, and I guess it depends even on the rigor of the program. If you go to a more rigorous computer science focused university, maybe even lower,
Right.
is probably fine. Uh, but at a certain point, your GPA is good enough, and you should be focusing on getting practical experience.
Yeah, and I'll be fully transparent. So I've been a manager for 12 years and hiring for interns and full-time people throughout that entire period. And I will say with complete transparency, the only time I've ever looked at courses or grades is interns. And not to say, oh, like let me make sure that you have a 4.0. It's for me to go, hey, if you have like anything programming related, are those classes comparatively like you are doing better or at least on par with the other stuff? Because if you're like, I'm nailing all this other stuff and basically that's bringing up your overall marks, and programming is like basically you're failing it, I'm like, that it might just imply that you're not really into programming, like,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah. So, for example, if you were getting really good grades in programming and you were maybe doing poorer in operating systems and networking, well, maybe you're still fine. You're good to go.
Yeah.
I'm really interested in the programming side of it. The CS degree, or even I did information systems. The scope of what they teach you is so broad
Right.
that really professionally you may not touch a lot of it. Their goal is just to give you exposure to things, and it's your decision to what you're going to focus on. If you're going to be a front end developer, maybe the database class isn't going to be as
Sure.
important to you, and that's okay. You need to find that niche. You need to find that focus. You need to do well in that focus, as opposed to trying to be this generalist. At least starting out, I would say.
100%. So for me, looking at grades, it was only relevant with interns, and again, not to say who's got the highest grades, it was just to kind of gauge like what have you been exposed to so far. For full-time people, I have never once in my life looked at anything related to school.
Yeah.
Hey, like, did you go to school? Interesting. Okay. Oh, you went for a master's on top of that? Okay, interesting. But I'm not sitting there going, tell me your grades, because that's going to dictate, because for me, it has never made a difference at all.
And that's the interesting thing we talk about, not to sidetrack us too much, where you
Sure.
talk about like the college affordability crisis.
Yep.
Like, I live in Texas. I don't care if you went to the University of Dallas. I don't care if you went to Texas A&M. I don't care if your degree is from the University of North Texas. All of these vary in how expensive they are. And they all roughly, having worked with people that have graduated from a multitude of universities, in general, the programs are the same. So you might as well go for the one that is the cheapest. You don't need a degree from a high-ranking university to have a successful career in software development.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And, to add on to that, when I was mentioning marks, I've never looked and said, oh, this university or college versus this one.
Ooh, yeah.
It's never crossed my mind. Like when I get handed a resume and it's like, hey, like you're prepping to interview someone, I'm just looking like tell me what where you've worked. And it's not even to say, oh, you worked at Microsoft or Facebook or Amazon. I don't care. I just want to go through the work experience and say, like, have you worked on interesting things, demonstrated impact? And if your work experience is limited because you're new, then cool. Tell me the projects you worked on. Tell me where you were building things, and
Yeah.
let's talk about that.
Yeah, the only value I think of the university name is just it does help you in getting your first job, because that university is going to have a career fair. They have relationships with employers. It might be easier for you to get an internship or your first job because of those relationships the university has. But outside of that, who cares?
Yeah, that's a very valid point. Is like for me, looking at a resume, I don't care, but that doesn't mean that different schools may offer something different with respect to resources and stuff for
Well,
students.
yeah, I'm sure Microsoft has a relationship with a certain subset of universities that kind of, that get funneled into your program. So, in that perspective, at the macro level, it might be easier to get into Microsoft if you went to these 10 schools that you have that relationship with.
But that's a good point, though, right?
Yeah.
The funneling concept, because again, more recently, I would say over the past couple of years, at least, I've been noticing like, hey, like college, university, not worth it for for software development. And in terms of worth it, I don't want to you don't have to go off the rails on this conversation, but there are opportunities through the schools that and boot camps can be doing this as well, where they have relationships with companies, and that can be a huge value add, because the companies are like, hey, we're looking for great candidates, and we form this relationship. And for boot camps or schools, like it's a win-win for everyone to be able to say, hey, look, like we have good quality candidates that are coming through, like can we help get them placed, right? Everyone wins through that.
So the question for you then, would you say it's easier to get into Microsoft as an intern or entry level versus trying to get hired at Microsoft as an experienced hire?
So yeah, my thought on that, and I can't. It's when we say Microsoft, the hard thing is like I only work in a small part. I work on
Oh, sure.
the Office 365 side of it, which when I say a small part, it's a huge part of it. But, like,
Yeah.
but it's still only a part. So okay, the word easier, I'm not sure, but I would say if I try to rewind and I'm like I have to go redo my career path, right? Um, if my goal was to get into Microsoft, or even I'm assuming this might be the same for Facebook, Amazon, for big tech in general, if that was my goal, I would probably still try to go for post-secondary education. And I think, maybe it's because I'm not familiar with enough boot camps that may have relationships like this, but I think that a lot of the schools, when they have internship programs and trying to help place, because for example, University of Waterloo, they basically set up the relationships for you. So you go onto your school's portal, you go register for your internship, and those companies are signed up to get students.
Mm-hmm.
There's other places where they're like, we don't offer anything, like, but you have to do an internship. So like, we'll see you in 4 to 8 months. So like, can't wait to hear about your internship.
Good luck. Yeah.
Yeah, so I feel like I would be personally trying to look for school boot camps, whatever it happens to be, that has this type of thing where, hey, we set you up with that. And for Microsoft specifically, I do see that they have many different internship programs. Like there's, I believe that we have one that's called like an Explore intern, which is longer. And they actually try to put you through not just a software developer position, but they try to give you some project management experience as well. Because for you, you might have said, hey, I wanted to go into technology. I wanted to be able to, I think, software development, but you might not know what aspects about software development. And maybe you don't want to be coding all day. You wanted some of the other pieces that are involved.
Yeah, when we talk about the job search in general, maybe that's why it's still valuable that your typical college major gives you such a broad exposure, because
Sure.
most people think of just software engineering, breaking into tech as just being a software engineer. But you have project manager, product owner, quality assurance, SRE. You can even go into design, back end, front end, mobile, embedded systems. Like there's so many niches there.
Yeah.
Scrum master. I'm sure there's more. I'm even missing out off the top of my head. But
But that's enough variety, right? That's not just writing code, or it is writing code, and it's going to be very different from a development perspective across all of those.
yeah, and having a technical understanding, CS degree as a product owner is still going to be valuable for you, right?
Right.
You're going to kind of understand what is possible and not possible, and that's your team's going to love you for that.
Yeah, like I have said, and this even goes up for like engineering managers. I've heard people debate about like how technical an engineering manager needs to be, and I just wanted to kind of add this in for even project managers and other roles that aren't necessarily writing code every day. And my personal perspective is that you do not, as for an engineering manager, project manager, you don't need to be the most technical to be able to succeed at the role, but I do think that it helps. And the reason that I think it helps is that the more technical you are dealing with very technical individuals. So I think about communication. And if you can meet someone at a level that they can communicate at, it just makes communication more effective. So if you're not technical, you're putting a lot of extra like strain or pressure on other individuals to be able to communicate up to you. And you will be challenged to try and communicate at a level that they're like, happy to talk at. So that's
Uh,
my thought.
There's a psychological aspect there too, where if my manager was not a former programmer, and maybe this is just me admitting how bad of a person I am, but like, how am I supposed to respect
Right.
anything that you say if you've not been in my shoes? Going back to the college major discussion again, I remember I had a friend trying to graduate with an undergraduate degree, business management, and I was just, since then I've been so confused why that major even exists. Like, why would I hire anybody as a manager who has not formally done the craft that
Right.
they are managing? Like, wouldn't it be better to you get a concrete degree, accounting, law, I don't know, software development, and then grow into the management role?
Right.
What are schools doing? Trying to I'm not going to have an undergrad recent, entry level manager telling me what to do all day.
Yeah.
It's weird to me.
Yeah. It's definitely an interesting dynamic, but yeah, you mentioned a really good point about the psychological part. I have had one particular sort of leader manager in my career where uh, they were like self-proclaimed not a programmer, like couldn't write a line of code, and they were one of my best leaders. But
Okay,
the
all right.
reason that they were is that they kind of, like I said, on the communication front, they could they would make it very clear in conversations, like if like where they were being lost, and kind of how to navigate it. So they were technical enough, but not from a coding perspective. And that's, I think, I shouldn't say the only reason. They were a great person, but
Sure.
from a communication perspective, they could fill the gap on their technical understanding by building their domain expertise. So they had built a lot of domain expertise, just not in code.
Yeah, and at a certain point, code is just logic. So if somebody can understand dependencies and like the needs between teams, as a
Yeah.
manager, that's probably where you want to be, kind of helping the team anyway.
Yeah.
So it's definitely possible.
Yeah,
I would agree.
but the point, yeah, of course, the more technical background you have, the more in my opinion, the easier it becomes to have effective communication, which
Yeah,
is
absolutely.
probably a good thing.
Yes, agreed.
So for folks that are trying to get started, right? Internships valuable. Does not have to be something that is facilitated by your school necessarily, or if you're not going to school, like you can still be applying to companies that offer internships, and there are many. So you do have to do homework for being able to find companies that do that. Do you have any sort of recommendations or guidance for people that are trying to sort out? I need an internship or something like that.
Sure. Yeah, I would say the most of the people that I work with are actually not college grads,
Okay,
or they graduated in college in a degree that's not technical, and they went to a boot camp, but they're trying to change careers. So
sure.
I want to speak a little bit to that audience because that is primarily where I see the biggest need in my network, and that is how to get experience or how to get a job if you need experience, but you can't get experience because you can't get a job. That same
Vicious
problem
cycle.
exists for internships too.
Right.
Even at the internship level, it's nice to see, hey, somebody's already done an internship because it shows that, hey, they'll be a more effective intern. I don't have to hold their hand maybe as much. So what I generally tell folks is to not wait for somebody to give you experience, but instead give yourself experience. So
Okay.
I talked a little bit about that earlier here, but there are three basic strategies that I say for that. The first being to start your own company. It is a few $100s here in Texas, at least, to form an LLC. Any personal side project you're going to do anyway, just build it under that LLC. Bring in maybe some other developer friends from the boot camp that you're working with and actually try to sell a product. You might have zero customers, you might make zero sales, but now you just transformed a personal project into something you can put as work experience on your resume. Now, a lot of people question me on this. Does that is that ethical? Is that moral to pretend that a personal project is work experience? And I would argue that if you look at Silicon Valley, how many of these startups there are pre-revenue, are equity only opportunities?
Sure.
And that is a sizable amount. And we would still consider those legitimate companies. So why is starting your own LLC with, five other developers from your boot camp, any different? So as long as you're trying to legitimately push a real product to a real company, as a real company, you're paying your taxes. Well, that's a legitimate company. So anyway, you give yourself experience,
Right.
and the best part about it is that the longer you do that, the easier it will be for you to find a job because now all of a sudden you have 1 month of experience, you have 3 months of experience, you have 8 months of experience. It's a strategy that only helps you over time because in the current job market, it can take months, maybe over a year to get that first job. So then how much better would it be to say, hey, now I have a year of experience with this small startup that I'm in versus still after a year only listing personal projects and you don't look any different than anybody else coming right out of school. So anyway, LLC is a great strategy.
Yeah, that comment about like is it ethical, right? I think if the goal of what you were saying was, hey, slap a label on it and just like forget about it and then just use that to fool people, that doesn't seem ethical, but that's not the words I'm hearing coming out of your mouth. And in fact, one of the really interesting things about that is, so even for myself when I'm try to guide people into like how they can get more experience, I will always say try to build things. Always build things. And I explicitly say if you're trying to get better at what you're building, like the programming language or the tech stack, I always say you don't need to think about selling it. I always say just build things, treat it like an experiment. When you feel like you're not learning anymore, park it. Go build something else that
Mm-hmm.
you're excited about, want to learn about. The difference here that I wanted to add in, because I like your recommendation a lot, is that there's a different set of skills and you approach building software differently if you are trying to sell it.
If you're trying to sell it and if you're trying to work on a team,
Yes.
it's reading other people's code. It's maintaining a larger code base than one that you can do yourself. It's solving problems with a part of the code base that you've never worked with before. It's, debugging issues that might span multiple systems. If it's a real product, you're handling real production issues that are affecting real customers. And if you're at that scale, like you're working with multiple people, you're probably hitting a point where, a YouTube tutorial can't really help you anymore. You're having to really, dig in deeper. So a lot of people work on these personal projects 10 hours, 20 hours a week. It's almost a part-time job as they're trying to break into tech. Why not put that 10 to 20 hours a week, towards a real thing and get that type of experience that you're not going to get if you're just kind of derping around on your own.
It's like I'm trying to think about like a spectrum of different things to practice, right? If you were, very new software developer and you're like, okay, how can I spend my time? Like, you're going to need to learn some of the language first. So you can go read docs, you can go watch videos on like syntax and language stuff. But that's just like one very far into the spectrum. Then I feel like, even though they can be complicated, like I feel like leet code style questions and just like, word problems, that's like a notch over, because now you're practicing what you're doing, but it's not really like building a system. The next part beyond that is kind of what I was saying. I was like, hey, just go build things, like, put some stuff together, try working with a new database this time, like basically fix a bunch of variables, but change one so you can get some exposure to it. But then this next step is what you're describing, where it's like, and I feel like it's the closest thing to the real world, which is try to bring the real world to you. Like, you're making stuff with the intention of it being real.
Mm-hmm.
That's the best practice there possibly could be.
Yeah, and if you can't do that, so that's one strategy. Another strategy I would also suggest is volunteering. So there are a few resources, and after afterwards I can share these with you, so you can put them in the notes or whatever. But there's one called, I believe it's chingu.io, and another one called thecollablab.codes.
Okay.
And what these are real world projects for real companies where you have a mentor that's usually like a manager or a senior engineer. All of the developers are also new, and you are building a real product or a real system for a real company. It's volunteer based. So these are nonprofits you're typically helping. But once again, so you don't have necessarily the complexity of dealing with, filing with your LLC with the state and handling taxes and, equity distributions or whatever. So you don't have to worry about that drama, but you still get the experience of, working with other people on a real project, solving a real problem that you can put as, work experience on your resume. So Chingu, the collab codes, I'll shoot those to you later.
Awesome. Yeah, but I think like sort of a meta point here is like, you need to be practicing. You need to be trying to create some of those opportunities, and there's no reason that you are forced to sit back and say, well, I can't do anything and it feels unfair. Don't get me wrong, there's gonna be challenges. It's not gonna be easy, but you can start to create some opportunities, and like there's no one stopping you from doing that part. So if we can think about the things that we have some control over, like, you can't control how many other people apply to the job. You can't control the volume of jobs that are available, but you can control how you're spending your time and building your experience while you're waiting.
Yeah, there is a type of interview process that I see get derailed a lot online, but it's actually my favorite for that exact reason.
Okay.
And that is the take-home assignment. Oftentimes interviews are just like a basic Q&A or like a lead code style live tech interview, but sometimes you have these golden opportunities where they'll say, hey, just spend 2 to 3 hours and try to build something on your own and send us the code. Now, I love those because instead of working on your personal project, which you're not getting paid for anyway, why not instead invest your energy into put 5 hours into that take-home assignment, put 10 hours into that assignment for that week, and blow it out of the park. Add your unit test, put some great documentation, add some extra features, do some abstraction, optimize the queries there, show your DSA skills, and blow them out of the water. So that is, as you mentioned, focusing on what is in your control.
Right.
And the take-home assignment is really the only type of tech interview where you can really take control and really differentiate yourself from the competition, because easy, half the people are going to see that assignment and they're not even going to apply to it because they just hate the idea of doing, quote unquote free work. And then the other half, majority of those folks are going to put in just the bare minimum, that 2 to 3 hours to get to the next thing. It's so easy to stand out when you get that take home assignment.
Yeah, it's interesting because it is such a polarizing topic. I've absolutely seen people debate that, and I've seen the free work thing. I don't know. I haven't seen this at Microsoft. Where I used to work, we experimented with take home assignments, and I can tell you, without a doubt in my mind, we never said thank you for the code. We're going to go put it into production.
Yeah, exactly. It might be different if you were in marketing or finance. I have heard some other type of take home assignments for business folks where you're asked to like analyze a company or to do some sort of market trade analysis that maybe can get used. But yeah, never in my professional career has a take home assignment been used in production to actually do a thing.
Yeah, like the company never has an intention to hire people. They just keep interviewing them with all these take home assignments, but it's really just the feature backlog that they're outsourcing. Yeah, I don't.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I think it's interesting. I align with you on that for sure about take homes being a good opportunity. One of the other interview styles that I see is very rare, but I really like is like pair programming, and I like that one from a communication soft skill side of things. Like we're gonna be working together, so let's see how we work together. The leet code style ones are my least favorite because I have I guess I'll keep it very generic. I know a person, I won't say where from, but this is going back many years now. But they had self-proclaimed they were like, I'm not a programmer, like I'm not good at programming, but they were applying for jobs, and this person was extremely skilled. Like they're very, very good at math, very good at memorizing, very good at testing. They got a book on how to practice for interviews, and they were able to nail a big tech job like fresh out of school.
All they know is data structures and algorithms. They can't actually build anything.
And they memorized it, they aced their interviews, and don't get me wrong, to this day they work in software and they're doing great. But they were able to interview with and from their mouth, I am not a good programmer, I don't know how to program.
Mm-hmm. It's a different skill set that you're evaluating in that interview process if you go that route.
Right.
Yeah, I agree. Pair programming is nice. And I think the secret there as an interviewee is recognizing that you're being evaluated not just on being able to solve the problem,
right,
but on how you're communicating the logical steps you're walking through. Are you thinking through all the different edge cases and validating those? Are you thinking about tests and writing your code in a testable way? And there's a secret here for myself is I actually, for my current job that I've been at for 4 years, and I think I'm doing well at, I actually did not finish the technical interview. I never got to the answer. But the way that I talked through it afterwards, I learned that was what differentiated me from other applicants.
That's when I interview people, and I will say that the way that I interview is not guaranteed to be the same way that other people do. I've been in conversations where people are saying, I don't want to go forward with this candidate because they didn't get to the answer. My personal opinion is that I don't care. Because if you could walk in and on a whiteboard write me the answer right away, I would say that doesn't do me any good.
Yeah, you memorized it and you just brought it in and you regurgitated it. Yeah, once again, it's the wrong skill you're evaluating. Yeah.
I don't need the answer. I can go find it. I already know what the answer is, but I need to see like how you think about things. I want to understand that. And then from there, I ask, I feel like very straightforward technical questions. Very straightforward. I'm not saying they're easy because it's not fair to say if people don't know them. But I think they're straightforward. And then if people are able to fly through them, I just add and change constraints. I say, this is great. Like if we were to change this constraint, what has to happen now? Because I just want to see how you think about things. That's all I'm gauging. Not did you go memorize 400 leet code problems and now you're in here just writing it out as fast as you can.
Yeah, I've even been in technical interviews where the interviewer didn't know the answer
Right.
either, right? So they don't know if your answer is right. You're just working through the problem together.
Yeah. That's probably the closest representation to real world stuff. It's like we're not going to know the answer. If we did, it would have been solved.
Yeah, I mean, in general, like we talk about school skills versus professional skills. School definitely trains you in a very different mindset, right? There is no teacher who knows the answer. There's no answer key that you're being compared against. There are rarely hard deadlines to submit your assignment. Typically, it's flexible, and we can negotiate those. Uh, Typically, they're all project based instead of individual contributor based. Uh, there isn't a book you can go to that tells you the answers to all of your questions. I mean, you have Google and things, but typically it's not one to one with the problem I'm working on at work. So yeah, the school trains you to work in this very, I don't know, I would say kind of assembly line type mindset, even for software engineering. When I would say software engineering is more closely correlated to me to the arts. For me, it's a very creative field. To see how everybody can come up with a different solution
Mm.
to the same problem, and that's neat and that's interesting, and I think it's beautiful. Even.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a really good way to put it, right? It's so many different ways to get to a same working solution. And from there, I think the science and the technical part is just like the analysis about, the constraints and the performance that we have for those things we're measuring. But yeah. Erik, I'm trying to be conscious of time here. I know we got a hard stop. So I wanted to say thank you so much for joining me. For folks that want to get in touch with you, I'll get links from you after, but where can people find you and what's the best way?
Yeah, absolutely. So LinkedIn is where I am primarily active. So
Cool.
that's Erik, Erik, Andersen, Sen. My parents gave me some hard to spell names. And then I am also on YouTube. I have my own channel called Junior Jobs, where I interview recently hired junior developers, mostly from non-traditional backgrounds,
Nice.
to help highlight, what are the actual strategies that are working in today's job market. So hope to see you there.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely make sure we try to get funnel people over there. And this has been great. So thanks once again. And we'll chat soon.
Thank you, Nick.
Take care.